evening and thanks for coming out. We're going to just find the light here so I can read. I'm going to read you his prologue, most of the prologue of Sex, Mom, and God, because it'll fulfill a couple of functions. It's an example of what this book is about. It's a very brief thumbnail of my own life, so that I don't have to dwell on telling too much about past history. This gives a little bit of a sketch. And it also sets up this talk in terms of the beginning of the journey. And so without any further ado, I'm going to read you from Sex, Mom, and God. The subtitle in this book is How the Bible's Strange Take on Sex Led to Crazy Politics and How I Learned to Love Women and Jesus Anyway. So you can see that from the cover in, the book hopefully doesn't take itself entirely seriously, but it makes a very serious point. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. Let me begin by saying that if you take a look at the book on the book table, or do the right thing and buy one later, you will see that the first thing in the book is actually nothing to do with my written words, but is a picture of my mother and me in 1959 in Switzerland when I was 7 years old gardening with her. The book really has three threads running through it. It's a personal story about a journey out of fundamentalism. It is the inside story of the rise of the religious right that our family had a lot to do with. But it's also the story of my mother, whose very life and existence and person proves that, in her case, it was certainly true, and I think of most of us perhaps, she was a much better person than her theology. And in other words, she as a human being transcended her ideas about what she believed. Unfortunately, it was that way around because it's so awful when it's the other way around, which it is a lot of the time in this life, where people's theories actually play better than they do when you get to know them. In my mother, it was the other way around. She came from this fundamentalist evangelical background that if you had asked her to fill in a sheet about what she believed about anything from gay rights to you name it, who's going to hell if they don't believe right, you would think she would have been a very harsh person. But in fact, she was one of the most progressive, welcoming, open-hearted, wonderful and beautiful human beings that you would ever get to know. And she, for my sake, was very fortunate she was my mother. And so the third thread that runs through this book is one that tells us not to make harsh judgments about people just because of the way they come labeled. Because she would have come labeled as a fundamentalist evangelical, and yet had you been a gay person who visited Le Brie in 1959 when nobody was even talking about gay people, even in the gay community, it was still very closeted, you would have come to the first place where you were not judged, where you were cared for, and where you met someone who was completely open-hearted. And the same would have gone for you had you been 16 and pregnant, or whatever it might have been. And so my mother was a tremendous example of humanity wrapped in a harsh theological package that seemed to make no sense at all on a theoretical level. So the third thread that runs through Sex, Mom, and God is about that. I mentioned to my publisher the other day that if I really wanted to be completely sold out to the book trade and make this a bestseller, I would have called it Sex with Mom and God. We would have gotten a lot more curiosity books in whatever bookstores are left. I think there's one in New York City that's still open. But anyway, so here's the prologue. One of the things I love most about being with my grandchildren is that they only know me now. So before I explain why I had sex with an ice sculpture and how my family helped push the Republican Party to embrace the religious right and chronicle my family's complicity in several murders, let me say that my granddaughter Lucy has just turned 2. She, along with my 3 other grandchildren, is my second chance now that I've carved out a spiritual identity as dramatically eclipsing of my former self, as if I disappeared into a witness protection program. My 4 grandchildren, Amanda, Benjamin, Lucy, and Jack notwithstanding, I'm still prone to label people and ideas as my mother labeled them. Mom divided everything into very important things, say Jesus, virginity, Japanese flower arrangements, lust, see-through black lingerie to be enjoyed only after marriage, and everything else, say those things that barely registered on my mother's to-do list, like homeschooling me. So I'll be capitalizing some words oddly in this book, such as sin, God, love, and girls, and also words like him when referring to God. I'm not doing this as a theological statement, but as a nervous tick, a leftover from my Edith Schaeffer-shaped childhood, and also to signal what loomed large to my mother and what still looms large to me. Blessedly, Lucy and Jack live only a few hundred feet up the street. I walk to their house every day and collect them for playtime. When it's Lucy's turn, she perches in my arms and talks to me. Jack is 6 months old and pulls my nose and laughs a lot, but isn't saying much yet. Lucy likes to be carried when we stroll back to Ba and Nana's house. I'm Ba and my wife Jeannie is Nana. Lucy's big brown eyes scan the 18th century clapboard houses of our New England neighborhood to see which of the ubiquitous American flags are wrapped around there above the front door flagpoles by the wind, Ba, and which are waving free in the ocean breeze. When we get to my house, Lucy commands me to read The Tale of Two Bad Mice by Beatrice Potter. It's a story about two deluded mice, Hunca Munca and Tom Thumb, who mistake a dollhouse dinner laid out in the dollhouse's miniature dining room for real food. When they discover that the lovely-looking ham, fish, and pudding can't be eaten, they smash up the plastic food in revenge, and then spitefully ransack the dollhouse. When she wrote the book in 1904, Potter couldn't have known that her classic story would someday be an allegory, aptly illustrating the delusions suffered by members of the American religious right. Some people who helped lead that movement, including me, were very much like Hunca Munca and Tom Thumb. We lived lives informed by beliefs that were not based on fact, and that led to deep-seated resentments that couldn't be cured because what we resented never actually happened. We took it as a personal insult that the real world didn't conform to the imagined religious facts that we'd been indoctrinated to believe in, and so we did our fair share of smashing. My late father, Francis Schaeffer, was a key founder and leader of the religious right. My mother, Edith, was herself a spiritual leader, not the mere power behind her man, which she also was. Mom was a formidable and adored religious figure whose books and public speaking, not to mention biblical conditioning of me, directly and indirectly shaped millions of lives. For a time, I joined my dad in pioneering the evangelical anti-abortion religious right movement. In the 1970s and early 1980s, when I was in my 20s, I evolved into an ambitious, successful religious leader instigator in my own right. And I wasn't just Dad's sidekick, I was also Mom's collaborator in her mission to reach the world for Jesus. I changed my mind. I no longer ride around saving America for God, nor am I a regular on religious TV and radio these days. Nevertheless, like those two bad mice who later felt remorse and so put a crooked sixpence in the doll's Christmas stocking to pay for the damage they'd caused, I'm determined to acknowledge the destruction I contributed to before Lucy grows old enough to inherit the vandalized dollhouse that she'll soon discover lurking beyond her childhood horizon. And then I add a little author's note here, which has something about my mother in it. Jeannie, that's my wife, remember, reads my manuscripts, gives me wonderful notes, not to mention her generous permission to tell all, and put her up on my literary auction block time and again. And I'd like to say this about my mother. At age 96 and suffering from short-term memory loss and sight loss owing to macular degeneration, sadly, Mom won't read this book. But just before Christmas of 2010, we sat down together during a week-long visit, and I told her about my project in detail, including that I was going to tell the truth and let the chips fall where they may, Mom. With a flash of her old self and a familiar defiant head toss, Mom said, "Go ahead, I don't care what people think," and I never